All right, it is a couple minutes past 7 o'clock on Monday, February 24th, 2014. This meeting of the Planning Board is called to order. The ZBA is going to hold off on opening their portion of the meeting. We're going to do our part tonight. The first matter of business tonight is Global Towers Assets LLC and New Singular Wireless PCS LLC petitioners. So for 207-225 Lincoln Street. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to conduct site plan review in connection with the site plan, with the special permit A2, special permit A3 parking determination for the construction of a multi-user personal wireless services facility consisting of a 120-foot cell tower on land of Anchor Plaza Realty Trust. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to allow the applicant to update us with any new information that we haven't seen you since December. Then we'll open it up to any questions from the planning board. Once those questions have ceased, we'll go to our engineer, Mr. Chesia, who can update us with his comments and review, and hopefully the planning board can get the site plan review tonight, and we can make a determination on the parking. A couple things to keep in mind, folks. I am going to take public comment tonight, so if you'd like to say something, come up with a microphone, introduce yourself, and state your address. Also, tonight's meeting is being recorded. We are on television, so let everybody know that as well. And if the planning board, I also want to let people know, if the planning board does get through site plan tonight, and we do go through our parking determination, that doesn't mean that the hearing is over. It just means that the ball moves over to the ZBA. Okay, so the hearing will continue down the road, but the ZBA will run the meetings from there on out. Okay? All right. So with that, then I'll hear from the applicant on any updates to the proposal from what we heard from you in December.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. For the record, my name is Earl Duvall with the law firm of Duvall & Klasnick, and I represent the applicant. Just by way of a brief update from the last hearing, AT&T has retained an outside RF consultant firm, and they are working on the Mr. Graf's requests, and we hope to have that done, within the next couple of weeks. Also, just today, I received the property valuation report. It's 82 pages. I haven't had a chance to take a look at it, and I can submit that via email, or I can make copies and send that off to the board, whatever.
Both would be great.
Both? Okay. With me tonight, Jesse Marino from Proterra and Doug Shadell from Modeling Specialties, who prepared the sound assessment. So I guess I can turn this over to Jesse. Thank you.
Before we turn it over, sir, I want to make two additional comments. Mr. Torndorf, Dick, and Mr. Sullivan were not at our last meeting, but they have certified that they have reviewed the record, which allows them to sit at tonight's meeting. Mr. Cook is our alternate member. He is sitting on our A3 determination as allowed under the law. Go ahead, sir.
Again, my name is Jesse Marino. I'm with Proterra Design Group, working on behalf of GTP and the co-applicant AT&T. My portion of the project is dealing with the site design. Just to give a little background, we were last here in December, and shortly after that, Mr. Cheshire was retained to do a review. He had gotten some comments. They were pretty new at that time. Since then, we resubmitted a package back to you folks in response to his letter. We did some additional drainage calculations and some things he asked us to look at. We got a full existing condition survey done, and we complied with some other things, including submitting of the A3 parking determination. Real quickly, just a quick review of where we're at. So this is the Anchor Plaza. It's off of Lincoln Street. The site is actually, we're looking to put a Rodland cell tower to the rear of this facility. Condito's up here. Again, this is Lincoln. Both points down the street here, and Tupelo's in this neighborhood here. The site is about 5.6 acres. It's comprised of several pieces. It's both in the Business B and Residential A districts. There's a line that kind of goes right through this area here. The rear is in the residence, and then the front is the business B. Again, this is turned a little bit. The idea here is, this way here is Lincoln. I'll kind of review the shape of the parcel here. It's kind of a funny shaped parcel. Kind of looks like an L shape. This area here is an expansive wetland. And you can see that there's residences and other commercial businesses surrounding us here. Again, we're proposing this facility in the rear in this location here. So this is kind of a zoomed in section behind the facility. And one of the things that we were asked to look at is whether we could reconfigure the compound to get the proposed monopole cell tower further away from the property line. We were able to do that by reconfiguring a square compound to basically a 60 by 40 roughly rectangular compound, and we were able to offset the pole inside the compound here to provide additional offset. We were able to move it about 15 feet to the east to increase the separation from the residential butters to the west here. We were also asked to take a look at
If I might interrupt for
Sure.
just 1 second, sorry, just for a procedural member.
Sure.
Since we are now a complete board here, I thought I'd open up the zoning board portion of this hearing. So if you would allow me, it is 7:10 p.m. on Monday, February 24th, 2014, and this is a continuation of the application of Global Tower Assets LLC, a new singular wireless PCS LLC, for a use variance from section 5E, paragraph 4, dimensional variance from the setback requirements of 5E, section 7D, and a special permit A2, under section 5E, along with a waiver of the 100-foot maximum height requirement under section 5E, paragraph 7C of the zoning bylaw, and such other relief as necessary to construct a multi-user personal wireless services facility consisting of a 120-foot cell tower on land of Anchor Plaza Realty Trust, located at 207 to 225 Lincoln Street in Residence District A. Thank you for your indulgence of
no problem.
that boring read-through. Thank you.
Again, we're kind of zoomed into this area here behind the existing Anchor Plaza facility. We're zoomed in here. Again, we were just talking about how we were able to reconfigure the compound a little bit to get some additional separation. Some of the other things that were asked by Mr. Chesh's review is he wanted us to do some site-specific soil testing that took place in two different fronts. One was we did some deep hole test pits back in this region for the purposes of stormwater. And we've also done a geotech. We had an outside firm do a geotech in the location of the tower to confirm the materials under there and that they're suitable for this type of facility that we're proposing. Again, there's no change to the tower. It's still the same height. Here's a depiction of what the geotech had recommended for a spread footing here underneath. Again, this height remains the same. We were just able to slide it within that compound. A few other things that were asked for by Mr. Chesha during his review was a construction sequencing plan. What we've done is, based on this additional information that we got, we put together sort of a written plan and estimated the duration of construction out there. We got about 75 or 76 days out there. That would be crew days to build the facility. Some of the other things that were asked in part of the review was a full existing conditions plan. We're able to consult with a local outfit out of Weymouth to do a complete existing conditions plan of the facility here. So it's done in much greater detail than we had done previously. Parking spaces, egress points, underground and overhead utilities. And one of the other important things was the stormwater and the location of drains and their outlets to the wetland. One of the things that came up during Mr. Chesh's visit was some of these were we needed to confirm some of the locations of these underground piping. And we hired an outfit that did a video inspection, and we were able to confirm that basically they're in the same general locations as we show in here. We did find in this area here that the pipe does a little bit of a hook, and we also found a couple of clogged entity areas, which we used in the report to help create a site-specific stormwater plan for the underlying property owner. This will allow them to, as part of the mitigation for stormwater for conservation, it allowed us to put together this to help the owner keep the existing system as working as efficiently as possible. One of the other things that was done is there was some materials in the back, some tires that I believe Reebok was using. There was also some old curbs in this area and some trash and debris along here and a broken fence. We worked with the landlord on that. He committed to removing that trash and debris, repairing the fence, and removing some of those materials that have been back in this area. He was also looking to add some cameras and lighting back here that would facilitate better security in this area so they could reduce that dumping in the future. The other things we did came with this full existing conditions plan is we were allowed to provide a parking count. Not too long ago, I would say June of last year, I believe a plan was before at least one of your boards on the parking for one of the facilities that's in here. Basically, we used the aerial photography here and also the results of that full survey to do a parking space count out here. And we also created a parking table, and the folks in the planning department helped us work through that on what some of the record information was in the previous filing, and we basically came up with a parking table very similar to what was submitted previously. With that, we added a parking space for ourselves back here for the facility itself. What we did is we took an existing space and we striped it, and that'll provide us two things. One, it will make sure that folks that aren't involved with the facility itself won't park here, and it also kind of saves us a spot for a tech to be able to park in this area. Now your regs itself don't really require this. It doesn't really have this as a use requiring the space, but we think it's prudent to do so, and it will keep access to the facility here during times when a tech needs to get here. In general, a tech would go to each carrier maybe once a month, so there really isn't a lot of trips generated here by a facility. It's an unmanned facility. The equipment is monitored remotely, and there's no staff that really spends a lot of time here during the day. It's basically a remote monitored facility. Some of the other things we were able to do was to enhance a little bit of the stormwater. Based on Mr. Cheshire's comments, we expanded and moved away from the wall this infiltration facility here. We also reconfigured a swale here and provided a little depression in this area to get additional mitigation. We also elaborated on the planting plan here to provide a little better screening towards the neighbors. One of the things we've also done was went to a 8-foot tall wood fence. So it's an opaque fence, you can't see through it. And we reconfigured the inside of the compound here to put the AT&T facility, the generator and the shelter combined into one facility. It's a little bit bigger. It's 12 by, I think we showed 12 by 28 here. But inside, we were able to put the generator there, so we think that is was a good piece of mitigation. And we'll let Doug a little bit later here tell us about some of the other goodies that we've proposed here to try to mitigate for the facility. The other things that was asked is kind of what these shelters look like. I think Mr. Cheshire had mentioned that he wanted to see sort of a floor plan. I believe something similar to this was submitted in the original application in the binders, but it's not something we normally elaborate on the plan because there's such detailed plans here that get provided by the manufacturer. But I just wanted to point out what this facility kind of looks like. Imagine our facility is mirrored here. The generator here is on the right, and ours it would be exactly mirrored. Generator would be on the left, and these are the HVAC units would be on the right. So basically, inside this interior, there's a space for this interior generator, and then there's a separate room here. It's about 16 feet by 12 feet, this area here, and that has our power and radio equipment inside it. One of the other things that was asked to look at was a site-specific tower design. We're still working on that portion. Basically, once the information from the geotech is done, the owner, in this case, so the applicant, has to select a tower manufacturer. They're in that process of doing so. This is a very representative pole, same height as proposed here, same wind zone, 120 mile an hour wind zone, 120 foot height. So this gives you an idea of what we're looking at here. Basically, this is a tapered polygonal monopole. What that means is tapering is that at the base here, it's a little wider than it is at the top. And it's polygonal because it's not generally round. It's kind of got a faceted shape to it. The reason for this was some of the questions that came up with relation to the offset to the property line. So what we've done in our current model that you have before you is we used a 7-foot diameter. This is a pretty conservative diameter because we don't exactly know yet the exact pole that they're going to choose. We will know that before things are closed out. But in general, this particular pole, which is very representative of what they would use, is only is under 6 feet at the base. So what's provided before you is conservative again, and we should have no problem picking and providing a pole manufacturer very similar to this one to meet those existing setbacks. One other thing came up is what the foundation may look like in the site. Again, this is one from Northampton, Massachusetts, but very similar size tower. A little bit different wind zone, but it was a taller tower proposed. So all things being equal, it's very similar to what we propose here. Again, it's about 6 feet below grade. We're looking at a elevation of it. So there's a pier. In this case, it's about 7 feet in diameter. It's about a 4-foot tall pier. It's on this mat. The mat is between 25 and 30 feet square in area. And that would be below grade. And above here, the pole would connect onto that.
Excuse me, you keep saying 7-foot diameter?
Yeah. So below grade here is it's basically a large foundation that's about 7 feet in diameter. And that would support that basically 6-foot diameter steel pole on top of it.
Okay, but you look at the depth there, it says, does that say 4 feet deep?
Yeah, it's 4 feet to the top, and then this particular design is another 2 feet down the base. Again, this is representative, but very close to what would be the ultimately would be proposed here. Again, we're still working out those details, but very similar to that.
Good. That's the scale.
So again, back to the site design, not much has really changed from the previous. What we were able to do is provide a little bit more distance here between the edge of the parking and our facility, and we did that again by going from a square to a rectangular. That provided a little more snow storage for ourselves back there. We still have the retaining wall here because we have to respect the folks in the Conservation Commission that have a 50-foot no disturb here. So that retaining wall is intended to help us do that. Since we've provided these materials, Mr. Chesh's had an opportunity to re-review these, and he's provided a second sort of review back to us. There's a few small outstanding items, and I'll let him talk about that when the time is right here. For the most part, there's a little bit of drainage items, a little bit of I's dotted and T's crossed that need to happen for conservation. Generally, the other items I think are very conditionable items, but I'll let him speak a little bit to that. That's really all I have as far as the site design portion, and I would propose that we move over, talk a little bit about the sound mitigation that was done here, unless you guys have any questions.
Let's take any questions. Any questions from the board first before we go over the sound?
I have a question on the generator locations. I understand that there's one generator for the primary user of the tower, I guess AT&T. Would each other user have a generator, and would they be within the maintenance building?
That's a good question. What's proposed in front of you is what AT&T needs. They have again, a facility here, approximately 12 by 28. Inside it is again, the radio room and that interior generator. That generator is sized for their facility. Not all of the carriers that may come here would require a generator. Some do, some don't. So it's difficult to plan fully into the future here until it's all built out on how many you would have. But a lot of the carriers, the smaller carriers like T-Mobile and Metro, generally have a battery backup system. They don't generally have separate facilities like some of the larger carriers like AT&T and Verizon do. Those are basically your two largest carriers. They basically on every site have generator backup just because of the amount of equipment and the size of the facilities that they need. So at this time, only one is proposed on the inside. In the future, depending on what carrier would co-locate on this, because again, we're proposed at the top here for AT&T. The pole would be designed to have additional carriers if they so desired to come on at a later date. And the exact components and equipment of those carriers are not known at this time.
Is the fuel source diesel for the generators?
The fuel source is proposed as diesel. There's a base tank underneath it. It's a double wall base tank. And provides about 48 hours of continuous capacity to run, and that's at wide open full capacity. Generally, it would last longer than that because the site wouldn't need to have full capability all the time. It would go up and down depending on the time of the day and how many callers are on and things like that.
Have you done a dispersion analysis as to the fumes and the effluent?
No,
as
these
to
are
what the track would be and how much it would be, and given the direction of the windborne direction of that, I'm just kind of getting a sense of what happens.
No, generally not. These are although larger than what you find at your residence, they're not really large-scale commercial type generators. I mean, they're good size, but they are designed to meet the tier 2 and some of these other particulate standards. So they would fall under those categories.
What is it, 200 kVA or so?
Oh, 50.
50?
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I had was just, I see in the current plan, I just want to understand what the setback was to the residential lot line in the current plan. I know you increased it by 15 or 17 feet.
It's about 15 feet, okay, and there's a little bit of discrepancy between what I say it is and what Mr. Sheshet is, and that's again because that pole is tapered. We basically moved it, but previously I had it at 66 feet. off of this property line here. This would be the closest residential property line, and we basically slid it 15 feet in this direction. Depending on where you measure it on the pole, because it's tapered, I'm using a number of 81 feet. Up higher at where the antennas are, it's as much as 83 feet.
Is it, the height is about 125 feet or so?
It's 120 feet, let me just, that's a good question, let me clarify that. So the pole itself is 120 feet here, and that's where our tip height would be. This little device here at the top is an appurtenance. It's basically an air terminal. It's like a lightning rod. Depending on the carrier and the equipment, we like to show this as optional. 75% of the time it's put on there. It's a requirement. Depends on the region you're in and lightning strikes and things, but it's just a very small diameter rod. That would extend to 126 or so. The idea of that is that it protects this equipment on here if there was a lightning strike.
What's the angle of incidence of the signal? What's the angle that it travels from the tower to the next point of reception?
That's more of an RF question. I really couldn't answer that. It's not, kind of a little bit outside my purview. What I would say is these are panel antennas, so they're directional. So let's see if I can get you a better detail here. What the equipment may look like. So this is kind of a plan view of what AT&T's equipment may look like, and you can see these antennas here. It's called an array. So basically, it's a triangular shaped frame, and there's 12 antennas up here, and they're panel antennas, which are directional, and they're basically 120 degrees apart. And that's because this type of antenna, as opposed to what you may see in these kind of whip antennas that are omnidirectional. These are a directional antenna.
I was just trying to get a sense of the nearest residence is about 86 feet away, and this is 126 feet tall, 120 feet tall. And I'm trying to get a sense of the cone of influence of the RF signal and what does that mean. You know, we see the physical aspect of this, but what's the RF aspect of this, which is the invisible aspect of it, and how does that relate to the kind of signal saturation of the residential areas in terms of how this functions, you know, how it technically or electronically functions?
Again, I'm more of a civil engineer and doing more with the site stuff. I know a little bit about this, but it's that particular part of this project. There's a whole other consultant and a whole other review consultant to deal with that. Mr. Chech is not looking at that kind of stuff either. If you're interested in that, it would be another meeting.
If I may, Earl Duvall, Council. Exhibit 16, I believe, to the application is the radio frequency report submitted by Dr. Don Hayes. He will be in attendance at the next hearing to speak about radio frequency along with the RF engineers. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Is now the time to ask about the zoning table on your
Sure.
A1 chart here? Can you just go through that residence? It's located in Residence A. Can you just go through where it's not compliant with the zoning?
So there's two basic things, and I have Earl will help me out a little bit. Basically, there's two issues. One is that we're in a residential district, so this is a site here. Again, it's that kind of funny shaped L-shaped. The front of this piece is business. The rear, which includes some of the existing facility, by the way, is in residential here. So what we're proposing is this one area here in residential. Now, the zoning table here up top looks at, basically the point of this table here is to look at the zoning as it relates to the parcel in each zone. And some of these items here are, you know, what would the effect of the underlying zone be? Do we meet the setbacks and such? The one that that we're here before for a variance of the setback to is the tower location off the property line. They're looking for that to be at least the height of the tower. And in our situation here, we are 81 feet from this residential area. And actually, because of the shape of the property here, you see, it's kind of following my laser pointer here. We're actually 72 feet from this location here. Although this location here is really not buildable, it's all a large wetland area. So that's basically, in that table, what would be non-compliant there as far as that is concerned. It would be the height and its relation to the this property line here.
So that is in the second table,
That's at this table here, correct?
right? And that's the monopole height is 126
Yep, that
feet.
includes that little appurtenance at the top we talked
Right.
about, yep.
The distance to the property line here, it says 72.
Yeah, again, we, in order to move this to get it off the property line more, before, when we were, the last time we came here, we were basically a little bit more centered in between these two
Right.
property lines. So in order to get a little bit greater setback to these residences here, we've slid this down in this direction. And what that's done is it's increased it from 66 to 81 on this side, but it's also reduced it on this side down to 72 to this line here.
So 72 is to the non-buildable
Correct.
property, and 81 is to the existing
Correct.
occupied property.
Yep.
Okay.
Is that to the property or to the structure?
That's to the, from the edge of the structure to the property line. So that if we have this 120 tapered full, it's assuming a 7-foot diameter base, which we discussed, it's not, it's a little bit smaller than that, but from that base to the property line.
But in a residential district, the rear yard setback is 15 feet, right? So
Correct.
ostensibly, the residence that's there, that now is 190 feet to the monopole, could be 15, up to 15 feet from the property line. So 82 plus the 81 plus the 15, do you follow what I'm saying? So if they were to put an addition on the house, it could be 81 plus 15, it could be 96 feet from the tower.
Well, I guess what you're trying to say is they could build up to, if you're in this district,
You can go up to 15 feet from the property line.
yeah, so they could physically build up to this region here?
Right.
Correct, so their houses are up in this stage, could they, yes, statutory, they could do that.
Right, and then
That's not what they have now.
structure would be 96 feet from a 126-foot tower.
His number is to the lot line, not to the
It's
structure.
to the lot line, so
Right,
what she's saying
But
is.
they could build their house up to
Yeah.
15
Right,
feet from the
correct.
lot line.
Correct.
So you would just take the 81 to the lot line and then add the 15.
If you were looking for a measure to the structure. Right.
It would be 96 feet to the possible structure on that property.
Yeah, a theoretical structure that could be there, correct.
Right, without curtailing their property rights, right? So they could build within 96 feet of this 126-foot tower.
Sure. As far as the residents' setbacks, you know, we have if we consider our facility the fence, not even the pole, we're still 30 feet from here, you know, over 300 feet rear yard to here, and in the front here, over 400 feet to the front. So with respect to our facility within this rear area, if you looked at our facility versus the residential setbacks, we could theoretically get closer if we were residents, but again, we're trying to maximize that distance in the available area that we have here to work.
How far is the tower from the Business B zoning line?
I'd have to estimate it. I'd say maybe 125 feet, maybe. Again, here's our pole here. And here's the the zone line.
So if you put the tower in the Business B district, zoning district, you would meet the setback, which is a function of the height of the tower. You'd be 126 from the residential, any of the residential district lines.
Well, not necessarily. As you can see, we could talk about a little bit later here. The only way for us to put that in another location here would be we'd have to lose a bunch of parking here. And we're basically showing that we have about just enough parking for this facility here. So if you needed to move that, that would be one of the complications. Some of the other complications would obviously be access, would be getting utilities to the site, complications by putting a structure in the middle here and plowing around it and things like that. So in one respect, maybe you could try to find a better spot here, but we did look at that. There really isn't a spot that we can really put it in here that makes a lot of sense and that can keep the existing parking that's here.
Following up on parking, what you submitted, we've had, as I indicated last hearing, we've had some difficulty with parking at the site.
Yep.
And your table on the plans indicate you're only going to be taking one striped parking spot.
That's correct. There's
But the
not-
base of the tower is going to be 7 feet, and you're going to have a generator co-located with the tower, correct?
Yep.
I imagine you're going to have some sort of protective structure around everything, have a fence or something around it. How are you going to only take one spot, given the size of everything?
Okay, good question. Again, we are proposing this facility in the back here. There's a grass area with some trees. We're off the pavement in this back area with our facility. So we're not in the pavement with our facility. The only reason that we proposing one parking space to be removed here is to get access from this lane across this row of parking to where our facility is here. So if we zoom in a little bit on that location, you'll see it here. This is the rear of the building. Here are the existing parking spaces along. There's some dumpsters and other areas here, and we're using this one space next to this here to stripe to get access by these existing parking spaces. And then here we're about 18, almost 19 feet off the edge of the parking area here, the paved parking area, to where our fence starts. So we're utilizing this area here that is basically undeveloped at this point.
But you're counting that access area as the dedicated parking space?
We are. Yep.
And so, and on that exact plan, there's an arrow to that dumpster area that says storage container to be removed as necessary. I don't understand that. Those are the dumpsters for the site, right?
No, the dumpsters are here. This dumpster in this location. This is a storage box that Reebok is currently using.
You're saying the dumpsters are those little boxes?
Yeah, these are the dumpsters in here. Yep.
It says that says underground utilities. I mean, that little box to the right is marked underground utilities.
Well,
The
these are-
dumpsters have always been in that parking area, not off the parking pad.
Well, they're not in there. Maybe they should be, or they're supposed to be, but they're not there.
So they're not on the pavement?
They are on the pavement. We'll go back to the existing conditions plan here. That'll probably show it the best. So here's the rear of the facility. And again, we're not changing this area in question.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So if we zoom in here, there's a storage unit here. There's a dumpster. These dumpsters are here. And they're actually in this region here, there's a couple of bollards. We are proposing to use this space here. So we're not proposing to encroach on this area that is designated as the storage and dumpster. There's not going to be any change to what's there now. So again, we're proposing this space here to stripe it so that we maintain access here to our facility, and that will also be where our tech can park.
What's the size of that space?
It's roughly 9 by 18.
And what is the size of your vehicle?
It's a small, generally the techs drive, you know, a van or a small
Well,
SUV.
give me some dimensions.
I don't exactly
It's
know.
a standard SUV.
Standard SUV.
Most of them are in a small Ford Explorer.
Okay, so
It's not a commercial vehicle.
mm,
And those are, you know, the techs, as Jesse had mentioned, go out to the site, you know, perhaps once a month for a routine.
is it possible that two of the users would be there at the same time?
Certainly possible. Is it likely?
Well, you don't plan on scheduling?
No, they're generally not scheduled. Again, there's a spot here, and there's also room in front here too. There's another 18-plus feet here, plus you can open up the compound. So there's other areas to park if that situation.
What's the
were to arise.
proximity of that space to the tower?
So the tower is here, and
Well, can you give me a distance?
from here to here, maybe 15 or 20 feet to the edge of the fence, 15 feet. 15 feet to the center from the edge of the fence here, the tower.
Do any of the parking spaces block access into the new structure?
No, I don't think so. That's, again, the reasoning to have this striping here and then this access here. There's basically a set of barn-style gates here, 12 feet wide, that open up, and that would provide access to within the compound. There's also an identical set out the back to do any kind of maintenance that you need. And there's also what we'd call,
Well, I'm concerned about obstructing access into the building.
in this building here?
Yeah.
No, we're in this corner here, so we have basically some separation between this lease area we're calling here, which would be for a future carrier, and our section that's back here. So between those, you may have 8 feet, say.
From time to time, is it possible that there would be two employees from the same provider at the site?
It's possible, sure,
Possible.
sure. Generally, when, you know, if they were gonna do an upgrade or anything like that, that's generally something that would be scheduled, as opposed to what we're talking about generally here is just maintenance, or if they get a service call. These are facilities that are monitored remotely, so they have, if something, they can actually kind of remote in with their computer and check how things are going. And in addition to routine maintenance, there might be a call to come out and to look at something that may not be working properly, or if they need to change out a particular piece of equipment.
When I was at the site a couple of weeks ago, I noticed there was some flagging, which I assumed to be the wetland boundary. Has that been confirmed by the Conservation Commission yet?
We're in the process with conservation now. They did review the line. We're not done with that process yet, but to my knowledge, they were not concerned about the line that was there. They were pretty happy with the way it was flagged. I believe they had one flag they wanted to remove or move around it, and that was done.
Did you use the new FEMA lines to determine setbacks?
We're not in a 100-year floodplain.
You're not.
No,
You're not.
no. There's a 500-year floodplain here, but that's not something that we need to be concerned with as far as permitting is concerned. Mr. Cheshire reviewed that too. We can talk to you about that as well. So.
Well, I remember when the Condito properties were developed that there were a series of trenches back in that area adjacent to your property. And they flooded maybe annually. So I'm interested in what John will have to say about that.
Well, it's not a mapped flood area. The other thing to consider here is that we're basically, the way that the grades work now is the wetlands here, and they basically gently go from a point in this area kind of down in here. We have this retaining wall, and we're also kind of building the site up about 3 feet here. So outside the floodplain, we're building up the site about 1 to 3 feet so that it's more even with this edge of pavement here. So If you went out there and you kind of saw a little gradual drop there, we're gonna basically level that out.
Will your colleague address the sound issue from the,
Yep, whenever you're ready, you can do that.
Any other
He did provide some mitigation, but again, he's the one that really should be talking about that.
I think we have one last question here, and then we'll go to,
Sure.
I just had one last question. How far away is this tower from the tower in the shipyard, from the smoke, the chimney that has all the transmitters on it?
I don't know off the top of my head, it is in the application though.
Is that tower within the projection or transmission radius of this tower, or is this tower within the transmission radius of that tower? And is there any capacity on that tower to serve this radius?
Again, certainly appreciate the question, but I think that's a question for the radio frequency expert from AT&T.
okay, all right, thank you, sir. I'm sorry.
Just one question. Just from a site perspective, if from a radio frequency viewpoint, the tower could be located anywhere on this property, is there a location in the business portion of the property, the portion zoned for business, that would work, putting aside the radio frequency issues?
Not without impacting parking.
Okay, so if you presented a site plan to the planning board that showed the impact on parking, is it possible that relocating the tower into the business district would work?
It's,
I think even importantly to that question, it would be whether or not the landlord would be willing to lease, that portion of the property.
That,
If the landlord is not willing to lease
Right.
that portion of the property, then that would not solve any of the issues.
well, it's not clear if the landlord's in a position to dictate to the town where the tower would be on this property. And so we're looking at a tower in the residence area where it's not allowed. And if there's another area on the property in the business district where it may be more appropriate, that's something that this board is going to be looking at. So at least from a feasibility standpoint, we'd like to know whether or not it's feasible. It may be the landlord wouldn't approve it. It may be from a radio frequency standpoint, it doesn't work. We don't have that information right here, but we do have the site person here who would address it. So that's why I'm asking from a site assessment standpoint.
I don't want to say that it's impossible, but it's certainly complicated because we have to maintain these access points here. We have parking considerations, there's overhead wiring, there's underground utilities, and we talked a little bit about the size of some of these underground things that will be there. The other thing to consider is if you slid it up into this region here, you're still bounded by residential properties. So the effect of moving it, would it make a significant difference? It's hard for me to say, but we did look at areas like back in here, we looked at areas back in here, but there's easements here, there's parking loading areas, there's egress requirements around the building for the fire department. So we did look at those things, and it basically drove us back in this direction here, where the site where we could put it away from the facility that's here and on an area that was not previously built upon.
I appreciate that it drove you there. Later on in the zoning board hearing, I'm going to be looking for representation from the applicant whether or not it's feasible. And it may be that you're not prepared now to address that, but that is something that we're going to insist on.
Okay.
Question? Could you go to sheet A1? And could you just highlight where the proposed pole is? Is there, it looks like on this sheet that there's a 72-foot dimension from the pole to the property line?
Yep, in this direction here.
Yeah, is there any reason, just for the sake of argument, that that pole couldn't be slid another 50 feet?
Yes. There, again, this region here, these are where the wetlands are.
Yeah.
So we have a 50-foot no disturb that we have to keep. with the Conservation Commission folks.
Okay, and right now, the box that you have,
We're
that you'll
right
be
about-
leasing,
yeah.
you're right up on it?
Yep, I can show you, I can kind of illustrate that a little
Okay.
better here. So,
If I could just ask one thing about the 50-foot no disturb, that's part of the wetlands bylaw requirements, correct?
Yeah.
That's, I mean, typically, they don't let you do that. That doesn't mean it can't be done. They could waive that requirement. Like you're asking us to
Yeah.
waive provisions of the
Right.
zoning bylaw. The Conservation Commission could also waive the provisions of the wetlands bylaw, even though they don't, as a general practice, do that.
potentially, you gotta remember too, that we do have there's existing utilities that are going in this region right here, so we really can't get any further this way without impacting those.
And well,
There's
what else,
also overhead wires and things, and
what are those utilities?
this is drainage in here.
Okay,
There's electric here, there's overhead electric here. In the back, of course, there's the dumpsters in this area here. In the back here, you can't really see it, but that's the back of the building that's right here. And there's a bunch of HVAC equipment in this region here. And of course, the property line, the fence is right here. So here's the property line right here.
right.
So, from the standpoint, the way we looked at it is we slid it as far over in this direction as we thought we could without impacting these existing utilities here. This thing is so flat that it's not really feasible to really move it around or lengthen it or get it in any other configuration than basically that it is. And again, this area here is already being used. We have that, the 50-foot concern, so they're really put us in this area here, albeit cheating on this side a little bit.
Okay.
Is that laser your phone?
No, it's actually a measurement device, but you press it once, it'll work for you.
My name is Doug Chadell. I'm here to speak on the sound analysis that was done for the project. It has changed. I believe that you all have a copy of the sound analysis that was done before the December study. The site moved, and in addition to that, Proterra has worked to increase the noise mitigation so that we can meet the most stringent requirement of sound. Cell tower facilities tend to be nominal sound sources in the first place. Most of the equipment, the tower, the antennas, the cabling, the ice bridges, all of that makes no sound. The shelter, a silent, inert facility. There are two sources of sound. One is the HVAC units that hang on the back side of the shelter. And we are talking about the co-applicant, AT&T. They have two HVAC units that are wall-mounted, and they are directed completely away from the nearest residence. Intentionally, they worked with me to find out what is the minimum impact configuration, and originally they had a highly noise mitigated standalone generator, and generators can be inside or they can be outside. Just because they're outside doesn't mean that they're noisier. In fact, most of them come with noise mitigation enclosures that make them pretty well suited, even in proximity of residences. In this case, we did, okay. These are the HVAC units, and this is another shelter and another site, but they all look about the same. If you visited other sites, it looks very familiar. This is the shelter with a generator mounted inside that shelter. And the difference between putting the generator inside and outside is not that it's quieter necessarily, because whenever this generator is running, you have to open up this 4x4 hole in the wall. Louvers open up because air has to come in to provide combustion air and cooling air. And on the other side, in this side, the air has to be exhausted from the radiator cooling. And in addition, you've got the exhaust stack, which is a very small unit that sends the exhaust into the atmosphere. In order to provide a comparison of mitigation, you have to somehow direct that sound in a way that isn't offensive to the community. And so in this case, they have cowlings that direct the sound to the ground. But more than that, this facility, you can have cowlings that buys you about 4 or 5 decibels. You can line that cowling so that on the way downward, it's also non-reverberant. It's quieting it on the way out of the shelter. And in this case, we've gone one more step to provide this very heavy cowling. And inside this cowling are horizontal baffle silencers. So what is left is designed to be 60 decibels at 23 feet. That nearest property line is 30 feet away, so 60 decibels at the nearest property line. And they have 8-foot solid fences. By lining that fence, we're creating an enclosure that shelters the community from this sound, and it will be less than 50 decibels at the residential property, any part of the residential property, and it's less than ambient at the nearest house. There are several houses that are nearest to this. One's about 160 feet from the noise source, 190 feet from the tower, but 160 feet from the noise source, and another is about 195 feet from the noise source. And at both of those, the generator, when operating once a month, will be less than the daytime ambient. So that's the configuration that Proterra has worked with me to configure this shelter. It's a community-friendly from a sound standpoint. There's a couple extra steps that I haven't mentioned. These are silencer designs. I didn't design this. I'm not a designer, but an acoustics modeler. Other people have done the design work. There's also a barrier material. In this case, you can see it's a freestanding generator, but the same concept is that this shield is a barrier between the source and the community, which is beyond this fence. That's this, if it is needed, that barrier could be shielding something like the HVAC units too. In this case, that isn't necessary because the wetland is in the direction of the HVAC units. So I wanted to introduce you to all of the mitigation measures that have been incorporated as a part of this to meet 50 decibels at the property line, which is the most stringent criteria that could be applied to this site. In the DEP analysis, you're allowed 10 decibel increase from the measured ambient. In the daytime, the ambient was 45 to 47, and 10 decibels would give you 55 or 57, and so we're well below the criteria. But the intent of this was to be neighbor-friendly. Are there questions in?
Well, yeah, is there any
in the
potential
West?
for a pure tone here? I mean, that's also part of the DEP standards.
Exactly.
No pure tone.
And
so.
there are not any pure tones expected in the first place. It's very much like the generator. Anybody has heard the generators in my neighborhood, about half of the neighbors have generators which are not mitigated, and we have them by right. Whereas this generator is under great scrutiny, right. And this is quieter than any of the generators in my neighborhood, right. Mine included, because of the oversight that these two boards provide. There are no pure tones. They sound very much like the cars going up and down the road.
I should just say, sorry, I've done a little bit of noise study work.
In my time. A pure tone is what you would hear is like a whining noise or a hum. You break the octave, the sound frequency, this whole spectrum, into what they call octave bands. And if you have noise in adjacent octave bands that are pretty close to one another, you get that pure tone condition.
And in fact, there are sources here, because you're talking about a rotation source. There's both an electrical source, a potential of a 60 hertz tone. There's also a potential of the blade passage tone from the HVAC unit or from the radiator fans. So I understand the question, it's a great question. In this case, the radiator fan is completely subdued by the silencer that's designed to take out that middle part of the frequency. And the HVAC units, they come on slowly, so there's no shock, and the fan gently becomes high speed, and then the compressor sends coolant to it. So it's designed to be in the neighborhood.
In terms of perspective, 60 decibels is what? How loud is your voice?
My voice is probably almost 70 decibels. Depends on whether you're there or here.
I'm just trying to get a sense
But-
of scale at the lot line. How loud is that?
If you go into the backyard of this facility, you're listening to traffic on Lincoln Street primarily, and every car that passes takes the sound level up to about 65 decibels. During the quietest part, 90%, the quietest moments between traffic, you basically can't hear any cars out there. The HVAC units on the roofs and the neighbors' HVAC units, condensers, all of those sources produce 47 decibels in this area. So our generator at the residences are below the existing ambient.
You said at the residences, but at the property line.
Less than 50 decibels. The goal of this design was to achieve 50 decibels at the property line. And I'm saying that in order to achieve 50 decibels at the property line, it's about 44, 43 at the residences, which is less than the measured ambient.
If the generator units were 120 feet from the property line, what would the noise ambient be at the lot line?
If the generator were 125 feet, I would recommend less mitigation so that it's 50 decibels at the residential property line. This mitigation is heavy, expensive, takes space, and a lot of other things. It would be designed to the most stringent definition of the criteria. That's the real answer. It would be 50 decibels or more.
No matter what you do. Is there any wind frequency or turbulence or any of that kind of noise coming from the tower at the top? I'm close to the ocean and all.
Let me say no,
No?
because I've been around a lot of cell towers. One time, there was a whip antenna on the top of the tower that had a plug missing or something, and it whistled. It would drive me crazy. That's one tower. In fact, it was on top of Mount Wachusett, so it's some facility out there. And because I happened to be there, I notified the carrier, who within the next month or so got the thing fixed. But it's always a maintenance problem. They are not designed to have open orifices, so they have the Coke bottle effect, which is usually what makes that tonal. It meets the definition of that noticeable tone or pure tone from DEP.
And there aren't any halyards or anything like that? Everything is fixed, and the cabling, does it run up the inside of the tower or the outside?
In this case, I only saw the graphic that Jesse put up, and it does go through the inside.
Do these companies do any monitoring of the sound levels at the property line on an ongoing basis so that we would know that it was working properly?
Once designed, this unit isn't going to change design. That's a very expensive process too. They're going to let it operate for 20 years. As a point of your condition, you could put as a condition that we test it. That would be a reasonable demonstration to you that this is as community-friendly as we've intended it to be, but normally not, unless it is a requirement.
Are the structures that you showed in the earlier photos, are those the only type of structures? They look very industrial. I'm thinking of a structure in a residential zoning district. Is there any potential on the design of these structures to make them look a little bit more residential in scale, not a industrial type structure?
Well, the facility looks like an 8-foot wood fence from anybody that's in the residential area. All of this equipment that I've showed you is behind the fence. It's a opaque, solid wood fence. So these HVAC units, 8 feet would be clear to the top of that unit. 8 feet would be clear over the cowlings. Therefore, none of the industrial,
Thinking the roof,
stuff.
the roof, I thought the roof looked much taller.
Yeah, the roof of the shelter is,
Yeah.
it's like a masonry look to it, and that will be sticking above
So that's
about 3 or 4 feet.
So that's it still has an industrial look.
Now, again, the design is something you could talk to Jesse about. From a noise standpoint, that roof is inert.
Any other questions?
I have a question. You're making reference to easements on EA1 of your plan, and I'm just wondering, the access and utility easements, are those existing? Have those been recorded, or are those to be prepared?
Those are proposed. So provided the facility is in the location that we show it, a series of easements would have to be exercised with the underlying property owner. As it occurs right now, there's an exhibit out there that the applicant and the property owner have agreed to in theory, which contains these similar easements, but they would have to be basically recorded or otherwise defined by map, provided the locations are don't change from what's on the plan. If you look at the last page of that set,
Right.
you can see that's the map if it didn't change.
I'm just curious, because I understand the utility easement, but the access easement, the landlord owns this property, so he's giving the easement to you as a lessee?
Correct. Yeah, Earl could speak a little bit more to that, but generally the carriers need easements out to public rights of way for both utilities and access. So generally those would go from a public way to where their leased area would be where the equipment.
All right, why don't we hear some comments from Mr. Chessie, our engineer, and then I'll open it up to comment from the public if anyone wants to say anything.
They've gone through it covered most of the issues pretty well. I think that there's just a few things that the board should be aware of, maybe some things you might want to consider for conditions. For the parking, access, etc., there's a couple of places where the aisle on the existing site's doesn't look big enough compared to what the current regs are. It's there, probably been there, but should be aware. And from our site walk, which was now months ago, there are a couple of storage containers that may not have been permitted properly. They may have showed up after, so that's something you might want to consider condition-wise as far as maybe they should comply with what the other permit was for that if they've added things like that.
John, does that include the storage container right next to the proposed parking space?
I think so. Yeah. I actually don't have the original permit plan, but on the site walk I did with Mary and
Okay.
There was
Everybody.
no storage unit on the last time we did this permit.
Right, those are, it would be a zoning violation, and there's other debris in back. The dumpster enclosure fence isn't up, and there's some tires and other debris we
Right.
noted.
Okay.
so there were a few zoning, I guess, violations that you probably should catch up with on this one if you want to.
Okay.
On the, in the back area where the new cell tower is proposed, they propose, the pavement just sort of, there's no curb, there's no berm, there's nothing. So they proposed in that location curb stops, although they're not shown on the plan, so you can decide whether you want them or not. But usually with, under the zoning code, you have some sort of a bumper for parking spaces, be it a curb, a berm, or the curb stops. So they agreed to put them in, they're just not shown on the plan. So you could condition that if you want to. I think Gary also brought this up, but the other facilities could also have generators, so you may want to condition something relative to that. They have, if they're going to have a generator, they have to come in to, so that, you know, if this doesn't get permitted and get, I don't know whether they have to come back every time somebody co-locates or not. So that's something you might want to think about how you want to deal with that. Okay, relative to stormwater, there's a couple of things that, one's just sort of a calculation thing. We did the test pits and the soils actually are very good. It's all sand and gravel out there. So it will work for infiltration. The soils are good for that. But I think that and there's some fill over top, so I believe because of the fill, they used a little bit higher runoff number than I would have used, given the fact that it's sandy underneath. And I don't think that's good. I don't think they have a problem with adjusting that. The retaining wall, and maybe you can flip up that page, that sheet that shows it, please. So, I'll just have to look at the picture, and then I can explain better.
Is that A3, John?
A4, yeah. Maybe might be any one of the design plans of the back area.
Reading.
There's a cross section, but I actually want it just on the plan view would be fine. Okay, yeah. Hopefully people can hear. I'll want to walk up a little bit. So.
No?
So, the way that the drainage works, there's a retaining wall here, and there's an infiltration trench here. So this is all basically crushed stone surface, but there's obviously pads, so there's impervious potentially for each carrier. So the water would shed this way. There's a little strip here to sort of pick up sediment. Not that there'd be much with the crushed stone. Infiltration here. There's a swale here that sort of directs the water that comes down this way out of this area. So it swales around it, and then it flows. There's like a notch in the wall that comes over to a little area here and then flows off to the wetlands. Because this is infiltrating the water and you have a retaining wall here, generally you don't want to put water behind a retaining wall. So I'm recommending if the plan goes forward, it's acceptable to the boards, that this be designed by a structural geotechnical person, so that the water doesn't undermine it, flow through it, or whatever. I mean, it's not ideal generally to have a wall like that near an infiltration thing, because you generally want walls to drain. So it's a little counter, because this water you want to go straight down, but if it's all disrupted, you don't want it to just find a short circuit path to run through the wall. Originally, it was very close to the wall, they moved it away a little bit, so it's bad. I think they have a membrane behind it and things like that, but it's a little tricky, that's all, so that's just another condition. And I think the other comment was that under the O&M, the catch basins, this is for the overall site. DEP requires they inspect them 4 times a year. Catch basins, we looked at the site and looked at the catch basins. They don't have sumps really. They only have like, maybe like 6 inches, 8 inches of sumps, so you really can't put a hood. There's really no storage there, so it's probably even more critical to clean them more frequently. And, well,
Are they pretty bad, or should they be cleaned?
they didn't look too bad. There's a few things, the pipes were worse than the catch basins. There's a few things there, according to the inspection report. And relative to the floodplain, I did look at the FEMA maps. I looked at MassGIS, I looked at the FEMA maps, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I'm familiar with that project. But they didn't have floodplain on that, up that close to this part of the site. And I know that stream, and I know it goes underneath Grove Point, and it's gotta be floodplain in that area, because that whole thing, but it doesn't go far enough back here to be in the mapped floodplain area. Because that's one of the first things I generally do, is to MassGIS, click all the different things, what's in there, and that wasn't part of it. I do think they're probably a little higher too, but, yeah, I know where it crosses under, Crow Point, that's got a flood there. I mean, it's directly connected to you get a coastal storm, I would think it's gonna come back up, or even a huge rainstorm. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody else has any questions for me?
John, if the full build-out of the leased pads is done, and it's all impervious, what's the impact on the drainage?
Well, it was designed with all the pads there, so they included all the pads for the impervious. Although I do have one thing that I do think they have to do a little more running of the numbers, but relative to and we look at a lot of different drainage. This is a pretty small drainage thing, and the soils, when we did the test pits, it's all good stuff. So I don't think they're going to have too much trouble making something work here. And yeah, it's just those roofs for each of those things, which is disconnected a little bit. Then it hits the crushed stone, flows through that. So I do want a little more information, but I don't think it's going to be hard for them to solve that problem.
Any other questions?
The only other question I have in terms of fuel, is there special containment, is it double-walled tanks for these generators, is it a day tank, is there they seem, if they're gonna run, they're gonna run for a while, so I'm wondering how you deal with the fuel storage, because I don't believe you can use natural gas.
Yeah, it's from what I've seen in other sites that I've been involved with, the generator sits on the fuel tank. It's sort of a standard unit. I'm sure it complies with whatever codes, because they wouldn't be able to sell them. I haven't looked at how they do it. I know if it's in the building and it leaks, I would presume it would probably run out the door, I guess. It'd be pretty obvious if it leaks, though.
So it's a
There's
central.
no floor drain.
It's a day tank, it's not a central tank for the.
No,
Yeah.
what it is, it's basically a 200-gallon tank, it's a belly tank that's underneath the unit, that's how they're
Okay.
describing it. And actually, when you walk in the shelter, it's a step down, there's like a 6-inch step down,
Oh.
and they generally have like a, generally, either they have a fiberglass containment, another secondary containment, sometimes they can do, they do like an epoxy, but generally it is a double wall tank, and generally they provide another location inside their room. That's why there's basically, there's a difference between the door elevations if you look on the plan there.
So you have containment in the structure of the building in addition to the tank.
itself.
So if you had a leak, it's contained in the building.
Yeah, I believe the tank is double walled, and it's actually monitored. They have because it's double walled, they have a device that they can tell remotely if they get something that breaches that first wall.
Okay.
If that happens, there's still the secondary containment, and then I believe outside of that, there's another depression, I believe it's about 6 inches where they can have additional storage.
And that's remotely monitored? Is there a security service or something that monitors this, or?
They, I don't know that. Generally, I believe it's connected to the AT&T system, so if they get different alarms for different things, it's picked up by them and they would dispatch a group. The techs, the radio techs, they wouldn't do that. They, AT&T would have a maintenance contract with someone who just did the generators, make sure they have oil in them, make sure they're working properly.
I believe the secondary containment too is typically sized to a volume that's larger than the fuel tank itself.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure in this case, but that shelter that you buy is a shelter that's, it's a code design thing, at building permit stage, you gotta provide a stamped set of plans to the building inspector, so all those things are incorporated. That stuff actually comes in the shelter and they drop it on the site. So it's like a turnkey thing that you buy, so.
So if there are 5 leases or 5 leaseholds there, each one then is separately serviced by the oil, does that have a ramification in terms of access and parking and truck locations on the site?
I don't think so. Like you said, AT&T is one of the larger carriers. Most of the other carriers would be kind of small pad-mounted equipment. Generally a 10 by 10 or a 15 by 15 type pad, and they'd have exterior equipment in a metal case. The only other carrier that generally uses shelters like that would be like a Verizon, and I don't think we don't know of any interest in the site from them, so.
Is natural gas considered a dependable fuel source for this kind of generator?
Say that again?
Natural gas a dependable fuel source for this kind of generator? I'm wondering if there's an option for that.
It depends. It really depends on what's in the street and what you have. Generally, the natural gas type generators need to work on pretty high pressure, and in a lot of these towns, and I'm sure Hingham, they really don't have, it's really a low pressure system that you have. So it really creates a problem. You end up having to put boosters and all these other things, and that can make it not as reliable as sort of this, what you have, so.
I just have a question that I may have asked before. Is this type of tower ever placed on a roof? Like so that it, just so that it can move further away from the property
This type of
line?
tower, no.
But are there towers that could be put on the roof of this building?
On this building, no. I mean, you see them occasionally. The ones you're, I think, seeing is more of like maybe like a fire department or a police department. Much smaller antenna, much different array of equipment. The type of equipment the carriers are using now are several thousand pounds up top. If you add ice and the weight of the facility, it's quite heavy, and a building of this type in the front wouldn't support it.
So this
But
is
occasionally you can see it.
This is basically an umbrella approach to providing the coverage. Is there a more linear approach? We had talked several years ago about having a more linear approach, which is antennas on the telephone poles every 1,000 feet. I'm wondering, why is that not the DAS system? Why is that not proposed for an area like this for coverage?
I can't answer that question, but
Yeah, again, I think that Mr. Grafe had mentioned something about the DAS, the distributed antenna system, and certainly the RF expert for Verizon Wireless, for AT&T, will do the same. So.
Okay, why don't we take some questions or comments from the public? I know we have a lot of people here tonight. The mic is right there. Please just come up to the mic, introduce yourself and your address, and feel free to ask anything you'd like. Go ahead, sir.
Tony Marcinkiewicz, 3 Beulah Road. I have a question, an engineering question. As proposed, is this tower at its maximum height, or can it be extended higher? And if so, what's the maximum height?
The tower is proposed at this height is the minimum height required by AT&T to meet its coverage objectives. I'm not certain as to whether or not this tower would be constructed to increase the height. I think in many instances they are, so that in the event that a carrier needs additional height, subsequent carrier, then the construction of that would be easier.
Could we get the information on how high that tower can be extended? Another question, when Jesse was doing his presentation, he mentioned we were in a 120 mile per hour wind area. Was that correct?
Yeah, it's either 115 or 120. I'd have to search the maps, but generally.
Because as I recall, the tower is designed to handle 110 miles an hour.
I'm not certain where you saw that information. But
It was in one of the, maybe Emily, you could,
I don't recall exactly which document, but
Whether it's 110 or 120, the building code covers that, 8th edition of the building code, and also and the TIA regulation for antenna supported structures, and you would have to meet that, whatever that is, to get the building permit. That would be one of the requirements. I believe it's a 115 or 120 mile an hour zone from my memory, and that's what it would have to be designed for.
okay.
What
Well-
happens if the wind changes and it's consistently higher than that? What does this rating mean, this 115, 120, and what's the danger in it not being in the right zone?
It's designed basically very similar building codes to any other structure. So there's wind maps that are based on probability, like a 50-year return probability, and then there's a factor of safety applied on that. So they would look at a wind, say a maximum wind. They'd also look at a lesser wind with ice on it, and based upon the codes that guide us, you get a kind of a worst case loading, and then the structure is designed for that with some factor of safety. The other thing that they do as well is you design it for full build out, right? Maybe 4 carriers say. This pole may never have that, so until it's loaded up, it would have even more additional capacity there. So. But these are structures that are designed, you know, very similar to other codes that are around for buildings, for cross-country electric type lines, other various structures, the same type of code methodology for that.
I don't know if it's a appropriate time to ask a public safety question, but there's an ice bridge at the bottom of that tower to protect the cables going from the shed to the tower. Now, at that height, it's not difficult to calculate that falling ice is going to be going around 50 to 60 miles an hour when it hits that ice bridge. As we've seen recently in Chelsea and Quincy, where falling ice from a much lower height has destroyed windshields and whatever, my concern is there are parking spaces not far from the tower. Under what wind conditions, I mean, do you have any data that shows how far ice will drift from that tower? Or let's say somebody is up there doing maintenance and drops a bolt and it hits a rung in the ladder, how far out will it go from that tower?
I don't really have any data on that. That's one of the reasons that it's within a compound. Generally, in this particular region, ice throw is what you're talking about, wouldn't be as significant as if you were on top of say a mountain or some other type area. But as far as giving you a distance, I don't have that information.
Can you get that information? Have you done wind tunnel tests? Have you done a model? Do you have any scientific model that you use for calculating that?
I don't design the tower itself. It's designed by there's some basic companies that's all they do, and we could request that information from them.
Because, I mean, we're looking at, after the last few storms we had, nor'easters, some of the wind gusts were up to 50 miles an hour, 3-second gusts.
Mm-hmm. In this particular case, again, we're about 19 feet off from the parking area, plus another 15 feet setback to the tower. And that's on the closest side. And of course, to the property line and to the edge of the tower, we're in the 80-foot range. So we could try to get some.
Yeah, 19 feet doesn't seem like a very great distance for something falling from 120 feet under, say, a 50-mile-an-hour gust. I don't know whether that's a consideration or.
Yes, that is a consideration.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. McCracken?
Excuse me, sir. My name is Joseph McCracken. I live at, on Bulow Road. I asked a question to you, sir, about the noise. Now, I'm, let's say, 3 properties away from that, being on the other side of Bulow Road, and I hear voices from that parking lot there. I know they do a lot of, probably more outstanding use of voice because they're doing some calisthenics, some of them are, and they're running around and doing things like that. So that might be in the 78 or 80 decibel group, but I can hear them. Where are these supposed things going to be pointed out so they don't hurt the neighbors? Because I'm a neighbor, and I'll tell you, I can hear more things coming from that parking lot than a lot of people do, because it comes right up to my window, and I'm on the 2nd floor. And I like to have the window open when it's summertime. I like the breeze, you know?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead.
There are existing HVAC units on the back of, just beyond the Reebok facility. In fact, we took measurements near the property line, the residential property line, because we wanted to get at a location that was representative of the residences. And so I took a measurement at Tupelo and then at the site. We took long-term measurements at the site so that we had several days of data. But through the day, those HVAC units are coming on, going off. You can hear them, I'm sure.
I can hear them sometimes.
And there will be times when you might hear the HVAC units come on and go off. They're 20 decibels or so at the residences. I monitored, or I modeled the nearest residence at about 160 feet, the next residence at 195 feet, and then the residences to the north, which was several hundred feet. Significantly more distant, but anytime you have a piece of equipment in the neighborhood, you're likely to hear it if the moment that it comes on is a different moment than other equipment is on. But generally, this equipment and all cooling equipment is going to be operated during the day when solar heating and daytime heating is needed. There are a couple weeks during the summer when your windows are wide open, and during those weeks, everybody's HVAC units tend to be on. These will be
I'm just
running
questioning
too.
the fact I'm almost 3 property lines across from that, and I'm still hearing those people. So am I going to hear this? And where are the...
There is no, the difference that you're describing, if I were doing calisthenics and making a lot of noise about it, it's an intrusive sound. It's, there was a question about tones. Tones tend to be very distinct because they are different than the broadband ambient sounds. Intrusive tones is like if somebody's over there beating a can with a stick, you can hear that significantly further than the same sound level that is coming from a fan that's cooling at the back of the Reebok office. In fact, the day that we were doing our initial site view, evidently somebody spilled something inside. They had a big fan at the door blowing air through the facility. And I'm sure that didn't bother you because it's a lot of sound, but it's smooth. It's an HVAC sound very much like the condensers in front of your building and every other building in the area, and the HVAC units on top of the roof. So it's mechanical compressor and fan sound.
And I would
That's
submit
what's
that the big
expected.
difference between you hearing voices in the parking lot
No, I understand
and you
that.
hearing the air
It's just-
conditioning from their facility, is it's
Understood.
behind a building, it's behind an 8-foot fence.
I just was wondering how they were going to be pointed and where they were going to be pointed, because
Well,
I'm
I think it's not
concerned-
just so much where they're pointing, but the height of the outlet with respect to the top of the fence in your line of sight. If you break the line of sight with a noise, it's a sound wave, right? So if you break the line of sight, you've done a significant part of mitigating that noise impact.
But you know how my property would be. You
I understand
know
that,
where
right.
Bulow Road is?
Right.
I'm up.
Right.
So I shouldn't be getting anything, my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not just if I could, can I ask a question about the, I couldn't read it on the board about the, how deep is the concrete structure gonna be underneath the tower? Yeah, I
Don't
thought I
know.
heard 4.5 feet, but maybe I'm mistaken.
6 feet.
6 feet?
6 feet total, yeah. That's what the geotech recommended. We don't have a final design on that yet, but we've done enough to know, and the geotech basically said, based on the conditions that are there and the material that's there, that they recommend no deeper than 6 feet.
Are they going to have, like on some towers, they have the wires to keep it from doing the number?
This particular tower, no, this is a monopole. It's a type of self-support tower, so it doesn't have guys or cables down to it.
I thought I saw a guy, but it must have been for something else. It must have been for a pole.
Yeah, no guy. This would just be, it's basically a tapered shaft pole. It's got antennas on the top.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCracken. Anybody else from the audience?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tony Viola. I live at 8 Tupelo Drive, and my home is about 300 feet away from the proposed tower. Can I ask the board's indulgence that I may ask a couple of questions of the sound engineer and maybe the site engineer as well?
The sound engineer is not here.
I'm sorry, the sound engineer is, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, that's right, RF engineer.
Just a question, and I certainly, respect what you're saying. You've indicated that it's a 50 decibels to the property line really is the sound level, and that to the nearest residence, it would be what? Is that number available?
And you're talking about nighttime sound or daytime?
Either one would be fine. Let's work.
Nighttime sound is, we have residences to the north, 29 decibels.
29 decibels.
And the existing ambient at that same location is 32 decibels.
And when you did your projections, this was done on the basis of a full build-out with 4 potential HVAC units running at the same time, or just essentially when AT&T has located?
I modeled 2 units off the back of AT&T. If there were, the only realistic full build-out scenario would be 2 generators and probably 4 HVAC units. The HVAC units are designed to operate in redundance. They don't ever operate together, that one is going to run primary and the other backs up.
So each of the 4 units would be operating independently?
So 2.
2 at the same time?
Yeah, and then the minor carriers, T-Mobile and Media One and several others, if they have an interest to come onto the pole, they tend to have cabinets which have very light fans that move air through the cabinets, a whole different concept of cooling. And they do make sound, but they make a very broad-based, gentle sound that is not like your window air conditioner or these wall-mount air conditioners either.
And the generators are internal, so therefore they would be, they'll be free of noise from the exterior? Or do you expect that there may be some sound?
They are not free of sound, as I described, and just because they're inside doesn't make them really quiet. What makes these units quiet is that they have massive hoods with silencers that keep the sound inside, and the sound.
But that was
does
taken
not
into
carry
consideration
outside.
when the ambient decibel sound was presented, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And at nighttime, from the property line, the number was approximately 45?
The existing?
No, at full build-out or full co-location.
The design target was 50 decibels at the property line.
Okay, that's all. Just for the record, I think that the town is now considering a bylaw that talks about nighttime sound that limited to 45 decibels to the property line. But that's another whole day.
I just want to clarify one thing about the noise propagation. You've only modeled the AT&T facility, is that right?
That's correct.
That's correct. That's all that's before, well, both
No, I
boards
understand
is
that.
AT&T.
Right.
So anything about additional co-located facilities is really speculation, so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, from a noise standpoint, because we're licensing the tower, it is typical to put in, I've actually modeled the additional sources. If they show a box on the ground, then I assume that there's a shelter there. And the smaller boxes to the north of the tower would have cabinet mounts. And the reason for that is that there will be people, or could possibly be other carriers come before this board. And it is their responsibility to fit their equipment sound within the envelope provided by this board's review.
Can I go on to site for a second? Jesse,
Sure,
just
go
for
ahead.
you. And I don't want to split hairs, but what we've talked about tonight is an agreement by Global Tower and AT&T to move this facility 15 feet. And we think that, as neighbors, really is a pittance. And that's one of the reasons we're going to talk tonight just about the numbers, if you don't mind. Your original application indicated that the diameter of the tower was approximately 5 feet. Can you confirm that?
Yep.
Okay. But now, tonight, we've come before the board and we've said it could be 6 feet and it could be upwards of 7 feet. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes and no. So what I provided was, because we don't know the exact extent, and the concern was the setback, I used a large diameter. What I showed was a pole of the same height and design constraints that had a base plate of 67 inches. That would be more like what we came in originally with, and that would be more like what I probably would think the final build-out would be. But until we get those final plans, I'm trying to give some expectation of a shift in diameter at the bottom because different brands of poles, they're built slightly differently and may have a few inches either way difference in the diameter at the base.
And just for the record, can you tell us when the photo simulations were done by Mr. Karen, was he using a tower that was 5 feet at the diameter at the base, or was he using one that was closer to 6 feet?
I'd have to ask him that. I believe was using a tower of similar size of the one that we provided as an example. And again, the way he's modeling it, you're never going to see the base of it in his model. You're going to see the upper end of it, and the towers that he models in there are based upon real towers that you would purchase and install on a site similar to this. So if you're getting at, are we showing you something really small and what they would build to be large, I don't think that's the case. Mr. Karen is very diligent in the way that he models that. So his photosims actually are based upon a real tower that you can buy for this situation in height and a representative diameter that would work in this situation.
You had indicated, just trying to get for the record again, you have indicated that the distance to the nearest property line based upon the new site plan, the tower itself was 81 feet, I believe? Mm-hmm. 81 feet.
If we're talking about the nearest residential property, 81 feet.
Okay. And then, and just for the record again, for the nearest home or the nearest residence is approximately how many feet away?
From the tower?
Yeah.
About 190 feet.
So just for time purposes, do you have time for one more question if you want to ask one more, then we got to figure out what we're going to do. Okay, sure. All right, now, meeting was scheduled to go to 8:30 tonight. Appreciate everybody's public comments. I just want to poll the board. Do we want to continue, keeping in mind how long site plan and A3 determination take, do we want to continue the hearing to another night and start off with that, or do we want to continue with the site plan review process tonight? What do people think? Asking the planning board.
I think we should continue.
Gary?
My sense was, in terms of the time and the other applicants coming in front of us, we have another one. We have another site plan review and then other business after that. Is that going to push the other? What time was the second applicant scheduled to come?
8:30, so we're late already.
Ours was 8.
Ours was 8, so.
Yeah,
fine. So
okay.
we're-
All right, Judy, you want to add anything, or Dick?
Yeah, I have big questions.
Okay.
So I'd like to continue.
Okay. Dick, all right. Okay, so what I think what we're going to do now, we're going to close tonight's hearing, and we will begin the next hearing with any additional questions of the board. We'll jump into site plan review, and we'll go from there. But I am going to need counsel for the applicant. If you could do a written request for a continuance, as you've been doing last time, that'd be appreciated as well. Okay. Mary, do you want to add
Do
anything?
we want to continue to a date certain?
Yes.
Yeah, do you recommend any dates?
Our next scheduled hearing is March 19th, but we've got a number of other things on that.
And
on
when
that
will the
evening.
radio frequency information be
Yeah,
available?
I wanted to ask about that too.
Because we want to try to make sure that we have at least 10 days, once we receive that, to have it reviewed before the board reopens the hearing.
Yeah, I spoke with folks from AT&T today, and I don't have an answer as to when that's going to be ready. I know we want, I think probably next week I will have a schedule for them with regards to when their review will be done, and then when we can get that to you so that you can have the 10 days.
You could do a status update on the 19th, like you did for SAB.
We are together on the 19th week, by the 19th, we're continuing to. It's just procedurally.
Figure out the time. Yeah.
You two boards have the joint here and the 19th.
I saw that Wednesday night.
Yeah, we have several items jointly already, so.
So,
Is Mr. Grafe back then also?
He'll be able to do reviews remotely.
Yep.
So, is what you're talking about, a continuation to the 19th only for purposes of a status update, not substantive discussion? So I don't think we need to have the abutters and neighbors come back if there's not going to be, they're welcome to, but so everyone knows what the schedule is.
Is that something we can do by email? I'm away on the 19th.
Oh, yeah, we have to continue this to a date certain. If you're able to provide a written update, the board can review that in your absence at your risk.
Well, the procedure would be, once we had the status update, we would then be in a position to set firm future dates for meetings, and I think you would want to know what that schedule is. So I'm not sure we want to do it in your
Would those be
absence,
available?
unless you can delegate it to someone else.
I think those would be available.
Yeah, okay.
So then,
March 19th.
but there's some questions out there. So what we're talking about is continuing the hearing to the 19th, only for the purpose of getting an update from the applicant as to when their other reports will be available, not to hold substantive discussions about the radio frequency engineer's report or anything else, but just to find out when that report's going to be available. And then on the 19th, we'll set future dates for the hearings. Is that fair?
Does everybody understand that? Sure, ma'am, you have a question? Go.
Can you just update us where we are with the shot clock with all this?
I was just going to ask about that. You read my mind. We have, I guess is this the one that I executed by email?
Yeah, I
okay.
couldn't find that one, but I think it's in the
Right.
clerk's office.
So right now, we've got a continuation for action by this board on your application, by the zoning board, to May 4th of 2014, that we've all agreed to. Considering that we'll meet on the 19th for a status update and schedule other hearings, I guess it depends on how many other hearings we feel we're going to need. We may need to take another look at this May 4th date, but I don't think we need to do that tonight, so.
And we certainly will agree to.
Okay, all right.
Do you want a written request to March 19th?
Yes, I've asked them for a written request, yeah. And that should go to both boards. Okay. All right, with that then, we will close tonight's hearing. I appreciate everybody coming in. I appreciate the applicants on tonight. We'll see you on March 19th or the date after that. Thank
And
you.
the zoning board will also continue.
Wait, let's,
And
so,
then-